Out of Left Field is brought to you in part by Coordinated Health, Hazelton Campus.
The clock is running, the ball is in play, so let's get going on this edition of Out of Left Field. I'm done with the generic sports talk, so please keep watching because we have a lot of great stories for you. I'm Cara, and leading off is the story of a Paralympic athlete from Harding, Pennsylvania named Stephanie Jallen. The 2018 Pyeongchang Games were her second, and I had the pleasure of speaking with her before the Games back here in NEPA. I don't know how they lit the torch in South Korea, but they could have used the light Jallen brings with her whenever she enters a room.
At 18 years old, Paralympic athlete Stephanie Jallen won 2 alpine skiing bronze medals at the Sochi Winter Games in Super G and Super Combined.
I think for the rest of my life I'll be able to remember just as vividly everything that happened in Sochi. Regardless of what happens in South Korea during my next games, what happened in Sochi is going to stick with me forever. If I close my eyes, I can picture absolutely every moment of the games. I can picture how it felt, how it sounded, how it smelled, absolutely everything about it. And it's just something that I hold near and dear to my heart because it's something I worked so hard for so long, and I was able to achieve it. And it was such an extravagant goal, something that usually maybe isn't attainable for a lot of people, and it was definitely blown me away, the fact that I was even able to go, even able to compete. So it's something that I do hold very close to my heart, so it's really easy to get emotional about.
There's nothing in the world quite like winning a Paralympic medal. There's also nothing in the world quite like a hug from Uncle Bill.
How the story goes, when they had a ski clinic up at Camelback Mountain, she was 10 years old, and her mom took her up there to let her see if she would like to ski. Oh, her ski instructor, the name escapes me, Mao, I think it was. When they strapped the ski boot on that one foot and she hopped across the snow, she says, "I think we got one here." Yeah.
Ow, there she is.
Just before leaving for the 2018 Paralympic Games in Pyeongchang, South Korea, Jallen showed off her balance at a send-off event in Scranton. She obviously works hard on the mountain, but she also works hard off of it, making sure there's time for her fans.
You came, I mean, you have an Olympic shirt on, you had a scarf, so how big are you into this? I mean, you into the games? Tell me about that a little bit.
Yes, I love watching the Olympics.
What's your favorite event?
Skiing.
Time for the media.
It's a lot. You really do adapt to the media. I was actually just in an event today. I had already done, before this, 7 media interviews today. So with 5 different TV stations and 2 editors from different newspapers. So I have already kind of done this today, but you do get used to it. You learn to categorize your time and your mind.
Time for her family.
When I go home, I spend 30 minutes. I do not look at my phone. I turn it off. I spend time with my family. I spend time with my animals. I'm very passionate about animals, so I learn to turn off, and then I learn to turn right back on again. And from one point in another, but I try to stay the same person. I try not to go crazy. And it is very difficult and definitely time consuming, but you really do adapt to it, and it's just a lifestyle that you have to enjoy in order to really thrive in, because if you hated cameras, then you would not be able to do this.
And she even finds time for herself.
I've always loved rock climbing, indoor and outdoor. I did most of my rock climbing indoor just because it was a more controlled setting, but I do really like outdoor climbing. It's an interesting sport and not one that's just easy to jump into. It's definitely a culture in of itself, rock climbing is. So I got a really good taste of that, and I would love to do it just for leisure. I don't think I'd ever do it competitively, but for leisure and for fun, it's absolutely amazing to do. It's terrifying. It makes you shiver and shake, but the endurance and the adrenaline rush is definitely worth it. And then you get to climb to the top, and then when you're done, you just sit there for a few minutes and just look at what you just did, and very rewarding.
It's not easy balancing all of this plus classes at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, and sometimes the pressure can show.
I get nervous that I won't perform well, or I've had races in the recent past where I would show up deemed to win and be 6th or 7th place, and it's all inside your head. Skiing is only 10% physical, it's 90% mental. It's terrifying, it's difficult, you're away from home, you're in tough conditions, and you know the injury is just right around the corner. Skiing is such a dangerous sport, so it's a lot to wrap your head around, so I'm always afraid that I'm going to disappoint my family or my community and not do as well as they think that I might do. So I try not to think that way. I try to stay positive and know that I know a lot of people will support me whether I fall or I don't fall, but it's still a lot of pressure to carry.
Jallen has had a lot of support since day one. Day one was February 13th, 1996. A birth defect left her with one leg and one fully developed arm, and while she had a lot of support, her family wasn't afraid to let her try things on her own.
So I was blessed to be a part of a really straightforward and honest family. They were just like, yeah, so you look different, but leave it alone. Just get used to it, get over it, you'll be fine, figure out how you're going to do this. Exactly the question how was started when I was a baby. And no, they never treated me any different. My mom made me tie my own shoes. I learned to do my laundry very young. I made my own bed. I did chores. I vacuumed the house. Even if I was hopping around and missing everything as I went, she still made me do it. And I was always involved in sports. She kept me very active in school, and I was expected to do just as well as the other students, if not even better. My parents had very high expectations. And that's the reason why I was, I think, so motivated and self-motivated, was because they pushed me to do that. And I think that's very, very important for parents to do, is just push their kids to the limit, see what they can do, because without pushing them, you're not going to know how far they're able to go. So I never saw myself as different.
In 2018, Jallen finished 8th in Pyeongchang in the downhill, 10th in the giant slalom and Super G, and 5th in the combined. She didn't add to her medal count, but you can bet she added to her perspective. She has an outlook on life many would envy. Listen how she took this simple question about the McDonald's in the athletes' village and turned it into something beautiful.
So I remember in Sochi, unfortunately, no, the McDonald's was very disappointing. McDonald's does a great job of adjusting to the cultures, so if you're not used to their types of food, it is very different. McDonald's in Wilkes-Barre is not the same McDonald's that it's in Rosa Couture, Russia. It's not the same. They have squid ink burgers, so yeah. Total culture shock. No, I did not. I was not gutsy enough to try it. But no, the village was incredible, especially with the sheer amount of athletes. So every single country, every man and woman were all inside this one village. We all ate at the same common area, and we used the same pathways. We were always in the same arenas, and it was really neat to be able to intermingle with different sports and different athletes from your countries and from other countries as well. It's definitely a very moving experience, because even countries with maybe political affiliations that are negative, that doesn't affect the athletes. America gets along with everyone, and everyone gets along with America when you're inside that sport. People are there to play a game, and we're there to do it fair, and we're there to do it with fun and with a great attitude, and none of that gets in anyone's way. And I think that's one of the most incredible parts about sport itself, not even just the Olympics, is that it brings athletes together, despite race, despite gender, despite where you're from, despite what you look like, anything. It just pulls everyone together just to do something great.
Stephanie Jallen has challenged herself to scale giant mountains and ski down them. Both have given her an interesting view on life, a view she's happy to share with the media, with her friends, with her family, and with you. Follow Jallen on Instagram and Twitter to see how she does it all.
Coming up next, it's local sports story time with author Joe Farley, who was also a member of the 1970 St. Gabriel's basketball team that won a state championship.
Out of Left Field is brought to you in part by Coordinated Health Hazleton Campus.
Thank you all for coming back to Left Field. It's so easy to check scores nowadays. You're just a few clicks away from constant updates. Back in the day, it wasn't so easy. In fact, after St. Gabriel's basketball games in the 60s, a group of students would run about a mile from the St. Joseph's Gym on Laurel Street in Hazleton to the Standard Speaker offices on Wyoming Street to report the score of their game and find out the scores from other Anthracite League games. It was a different time, it was a fun time, and it was a wild time. Joe Farley was one of those kids who would make the score runs, and he's also the author of Trumpet Call to Victory, the final years of Hazleton St. Gabriel's basketball.
These black and white photos chronicling some of the history of St. Gabriel's High School basketball during its last decade from 1960 to 1970 are fascinating. Joe Farley's book, Trumpet Call to Victory, the final years of Hazleton St. Gabriel's basketball, adds color to these photos and life to the people in them.
I tried to put a book together that would give a sense of the times, would tell the story of St. Gabriel's and some of the great players, and some of the great players that played against St. Gabriel's. I wanted to give a taste of what basketball was like in this area at that time and the excitement that was there, and I hope I did it.
In our story, just like in the Bible, St. Gabriel needed St. Joseph to help fulfill his destiny. The school dedicated to St. Gabriel the Archangel needed an assist from a gym named for St. Joseph to propel its basketball program forward. This has nothing to do with Catholicism and everything to do with space. St. Joe's Gym on Laurel Street in Hazleton could seat around 3,000 people. St. Gabe's Gym on Wyoming Street was much smaller, and for the G-men to play big-time basketball, they needed a bigger stage. One priest put a plan in motion.
That was Father Haggerty, and he's the one that moved St. Gabriel's from the little gym that was in the school, little bandbox that had what was called restraining lines. You know what a restraining line is? Well, that was because the out of bounds was so close to the wall that someone bringing the ball in from out of bounds would actually be standing in bounds. So they had what was called a restraining line 3 feet away that a defensive player could not go in that line while a guy was inbounding the ball. It was called the restraining line. But that's how small the court was. So Father Haggerty moved us to St. Joe's because he wanted to emphasize basketball. And the reason he said he did it was because one year, one of his early years in charge of the program, out of 80 boys in the school, 66 of them went out for basketball. And he thought if it's important enough for these guys and the parish as a whole, let's really push it.
While St. Joe's may be the star court in Farley's book, it would be nothing without its co-stars, the playgrounds all around Greater Hazleton. Farley's G-men called the Pine Street Playground home.
But kids would spend literally all day at the local playground because you had these counselors, there were activities, there were games between the playgrounds, and the playground championships back then, the basketball games, drew hundreds of people. We played in 1969. We lost in the 3-game series. It's Pine Street against D.A. Harmon. We won it in 70, but in 69, there were literally, at those games, they were bringing lawn chairs. And when D.A. Harmon, when they beat us in the 3rd game, the parents, the D.A. Harmon parents, had champagne waiting for the team to celebrate winning the city championship, the city playground championship. Yeah. I think the city really misses that. I think that gave Hazleton something other cities didn't have.
Players and teams were molded on the hard playground pavement in the summers before school. Farley gives a ton of credit for St. Gabriel's 1970 state title to their summertime coach, Bruce Ellis. Ellis brings us to Chapter 2 of our story.
One of the little stories in that book, I talk about Bruce Ellis, who follows basketball around here to this day, and told me that as far as he's concerned, Hoffman's the best player ever to come out of the city. Bruce watches basketball all the time to this day, NBA, college, everything. And he was watching the first NBA dunk contest. And it was won by a player who dunked, it was like, I think 1984 was the first one. And the player who won it did it by dunking 2 basketballs at the same time. And Bruce said, I'm watching that and I'm thinking, I saw Paul Hoffman do that same thing at Pine Street Playground in 1968.
Paul Hoffman scored 2,000 points in his high school career and then went off to St. Bonaventure University, where he played in the NCAA Final Four. However, he didn't make life easy for the Saints when they were looking for pickup games in the summer.
At Pine Street, we didn't have enough guys to play a game. We'd hop into Bruce Ellis's car and we'd go looking for other playgrounds, but we learned that if they saw Paul, they wouldn't play. So we used to make Paul duck down as we approached the playground. We'd come out, set up a game, and then we'd let Paul come out of the car.
One of the most interesting characters in the book is Farley himself. He was a talented point guard who was basically expelled from St. Gabriel's after his junior year. It's a long story, so you'll have to read the book, but eventually he wound up back in the purple and white for the G-men his senior year.
And St. Gabriel's lost a couple exhibition games early. And all of a sudden, 3 of the players showed up at my door and said, you can come back if you want. They say they'll take you back. And I went and checked it out, and they told me, yeah, I could come back to school. And I went back, and I was still ineligible until one of the priests discovered a PCIAA rule. Because at that time, there was a PIAA and a Pennsylvania Catholic. Interscholastic Athletic Association. They had their own rules. And under their rules, I was eligible to play after 30 days returning to St. Gabriel's, but only eligible to play against non-public schools. So I was able to play against MMI, Marian Catholic, and a school by the name of Cardinal Brennan back then. And then the entire state championship run. So I got to play in 8 games, and I always tell the guys, you know, you were 11-7 without me, and 8-0 with me. So
The Saints went on to win the 1970 PCIAA state championship that season, the last ever basketball season for St. Gabriel's. St. Gabriel's won state titles, league titles, and even beat the much larger Hazleton High School a few times during its last decade. There's a lot we had to leave out from our little story on this book, but we should mention the name Digger Phelps. Yes, that Digger Phelps, the one that led the University of Notre Dame to their only Final Four appearance, got his start as a head coach at St. Gabriel's High School in Hazleton. And that takes us to the end of our story and the beginning of Trumpet Call to Victory, the final years of Hazleton St. Gabriel's basketball.
the idea came when a guy that I went to college with had been in a used bookstore, and he saw Digger Phelps's book, a Coach's Tale or something, I forget what it's called, but he bought it for me. And I immediately went to the index to look for St. Gabriel's. And I found it. I went to that page, and Digger compared his coming to St. Gabriel's to the movie Hoosiers. And I began to think about that, and I thought, you know, I could play that angle and tell the story of this little parochial school from the coal regions here in Pennsylvania that had at most 200 students in their high school, maybe 80 boys in grades 9 through 12, that won 3 state titles in 5 years, won an Anthracite League title, should have won more, and launched Digger Phelps's head coaching career. So I tried to, and I wanted to cover Paul Hoffman, who was an all-state player, probably the greatest player to this date to come out of the city of Hazleton. So there was lots to cover, but I wanted to cover it from this little school being so successful was what I really wanted to get across.
The earth stood still when there was a big local basketball game in the 1960s in the Hazleton area. Stores would close, movie theaters would be empty, and thousands would come to see the Saints go marching into St. Joe's Gym. Extra, extra, read all about it.
Coming up, we bowl with some of the clients at Community Services for Sight in Hazleton. Out of Left Field is brought to you in part by Coordinated Health Hazleton Campus. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. I always knew Joe Bogwist was cool. In fact, I still remember Bogfest 2002 when almost all of my class of Bishop Hafey High School gathered around Joe Bogwist while he played guitar for almost an hour and we all sang along. I always knew Joe Bogwist, blind since birth, was cool, but I never knew how cool until the 2018 Community Services for Sight No-Tap Bowling Tournament. Most people in the Hazleton area know that Joe Bogwist can rock. Blind since birth, Joe didn't let that stop him from pursuing his passion.
I had a transistor radio from when I was like 6 years old, and carried around, and I really got into listening to music and some of the great stuff that was on the air in the 60s and 70s with the AM radio days of being what they were. And then my grandmother got me a guitar. It was just a kind of a plastic guitar. It wasn't really a great one, and it had pictures of cowboys on it and stuff. It was a 4-string guitar, and I didn't know how to play anything. I mean, I didn't know a thing about a guitar, but I started playing it, listening to the Beatles and some of the stuff that I really loved on the air, on the radio. And then my mom got me a really nice guitar, classical, in '71, and it just kept on going from there. I learned a little bit from people that friends of mine that could play, and then I went and signed up for lessons. at a place called Staff Music Center in Hazleton on Wyoming Street. Came home one afternoon from school and told my mom, I just signed up for guitar lessons. I didn't even ask her if I could. And she said, okay. So I went and I got a little further with doing that. And then the rest was just learning by, groping, for chords and listening to stuff on my records and picking it up by ear.
So Joe can rock, but did you know that he can also roll?
When I was in high school in Hazleton, I went to Hazleton, I was on the intramural bowling team, and I used to bowl with them, went to school.
Were you always good? Were you a good bowler?
No. Whatever, depends on what you call good. When I was in high school bowling, my average was about a 90. And then when I was bowling with the Blind Association, we used to go bowling on Tuesdays a long time ago at Bowl Arena before they remodeled it. And I was bowling around 100, 110 there, and 120 sometimes. And that's not too bad for a blind bowler. It's not great, but it's not bad.
This is just one of the great stories from Community Services for Sight's annual No Tap Bowling Tournament. Joe's been helping the sighted in the community understand the challenges of being blind for years, and he's also been helping those that are visually impaired and blind understand that many of those challenges can be overcome.
My very first day on the job, the part-time president CEO said to me, "Here's your desk, call Joe Bogwist." I was like, who's Joe Bogwist and where are you going? So I called Joe and I went over and I sat with Joe for a couple of hours and just talked to him. And he was just so welcoming. And I had never worked with somebody visually impaired, so I wasn't even certain at that point. I was right out of college if I was going to be able to even do this job because I had no training. But Joe trained me, got my feet wet, and Joe is truly an inspiration. If I don't know something or I'm working with a client and they approach me with something I haven't found before, I'll call Joe and say, hey, what do you think? How can I help this person? And he always gives me the right information. He's always willing to help people. He's a great advocate, and he's just an all-around great guy.
He's a good bowler.
He's a very good bowler.
Carl Scott is also a good bowler. He has 25 perfect games and rolled a .266 on this day, just missing his 26th perfect game. He's not a client with Community Services for Sight, but he's always at this tournament with the Pulaski Club from Hazel Township. In 2018, the club raised $1,500 for Community Services for Sight.
I wanted to establish for people you're a good bowler. When you come here and you see some of the clients, are you impressed by what they can do?
Yes, I am. Yes, I very am. As a matter of fact, there was one blind bowler I was watching on national television. They said that blind bowlers can't do nothing. This guy's averaging 212 as a blind bowler. He is basically fundamentally blind, but because of bowling, the man controlled the ball. The man controlled the ball. God bless him.
Your club gives so much. What do you hope people watching this will take away from either giving to Community Services for Sight or just helping the community in general?
I hope they give to the Community Services for Sight because I guarantee you, if I take my glasses off, I probably won't be able to see you at about 10 feet. Because I would probably more likely be legally blind without my own glasses, seriously.
Raul Velez is 16 years old and blind in his left eye. A role model for his younger sister, he doesn't let that slow him down whether he's bowling or playing football.
Because the helmet covers my left eye really a lot. So I have to turn my head to my left side so I can see who's coming my way.
So, you manage with it. You're on the team, right? You're playing in that. So how do you cope with it?
Well, sometimes my friends tell me to leave my lead blockers and tell me who's coming or not.
So communication is key.
Yeah. As I going up and go to the NFL, I want to improve that. Nothing can stop you. Always believe in yourself. Never give up.
Sports have become an important part of the yearly youth summer camps hosted by Community Services for Sight.
Why sports?
Well, because a lot of our kids, when I first meet them, they'll often tell me they feel isolated. Gym class is something that they fear at school because the other kids are sighted. They feel like they're not keeping up. Some of the gym teachers, and physical education professionals, they do adapt a lot of things for our kids, but sometimes it's just not enough to make them feel included. Even while they're bowling today, a few of the girls, they weren't excelling the way that they wanted to, and they get upset. And you have to tell them, I'm fully sighted and I'm going to do, not even as well as you're doing right now. So we try to just get them involved in things that every kid is doing, because really we want our kids to be like every kid, because they are like every kid, they just do it slightly different.
It's all about building confidence and great memories. With enough confidence, who knows where life will take any of us? After all, no one can see the future.
That's all the stories I have to share with you this time, but there's a ton more at ssptv.com and on the Samsung Productions app. Check out Out of Left Field on both. Until next time, take it easy.